Your Honor, I move to have this witness's testimony stricken from the record. Major Philip Hastings Stowe, at the prosecutor's table in courtroom 3 of the Judge Advocate General Course headquarters at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He was 36 years old, Harvard law educated, and had a conviction rate that made him one of the most feared military prosecutors in the armed forces. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his voice carried the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a case that mattered. On what grounds, Major? Judge Colonel Sarah Brennan asked from the bench. She was in her 50s, a career military judge with a reputation for running a tight courtroom. She looked down at Hastings over her reading glasses, her expression neutral, but her tone suggesting she'd better hear something go. Reliability, Your Honor. Hastings gestured toward the witness stand, where an elderly man sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Mr. James Crawford is 79 years old. His testimony regarding events that allegedly occurred in 1971 over 50 years ago cannot be considered reliable given the well-documented effects of age on memory retention and recall. The old man in the witness box didn't react. James Crawford wore a simple brown suit that had seen better days, a white shirt with a slightly frayed collar, and a thin tie that looked like it might have been fashionable sometime in the 1980s. His face was deeply lined, his white hair combed neatly to the side. He looked like someone's grandfather, not like someone whose testimony could determine whether a decorated Army colonel spent the rest of his life in federal prison. The case was United States v. Colonel Marcus Reed. Reed sat at the defense table, his dress uniform displaying rows of ribbons from 3 decades of service. He was accused of falsifying after-action reports from Iraq, covering up civilian casualties, and obstruction of justice. It was a career-ending, reputation-destroying case that had made national headlines. And James Crawford claimed he had been there. Claimed he'd witnessed what really happened on that night in Baghdad in 2004. Claimed Colonel Reed was innocent. Your Honor, Hastings continued, warming to his argument, I have here sworn affidavits from 3 medical professionals stating that individuals over the age of 75 experience significant cognitive decline. Memory becomes unreliable. Details become confused. Mr. Crawford's testimony, while perhaps well-intentioned, is simply not credible given his advanced age. Defense attorney Captain Michelle Torres shot to her feet. Objection. Your Honor, age alone is not grounds for. I'm not finished, Captain, Hastings interrupted smoothly. Furthermore, Mr. Crawford has no official documentation proving he was even in Iraq at the time in question, no military orders, no contractor records, no passport stamps. He claims he was there in an unofficial capacity, which I would argue makes him either a liar or someone whose memory has failed him so completely that he cannot distinguish reality from imagination. In the witness box, James Crawford remained perfectly still. His pale blue eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance, his expression unreadable. If the accusations bothered him, he gave no sign. Judge Brennan looked down at the case file in front of her. Mr. Crawford, the record shows you testified that you were in Baghdad as a consultant. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, James replied. His voice was quiet but clear, with a slight southern drawl that spoke of rural roots. What kind of consultant? The kind that doesn't get written down in official records, ma'am, Hastings pounced. Your Honor, that's exactly my point. This man claims to have been involved in classified operations, yet has no proof. No documentation, no corroboration. I submit that he's either fabricating his story entirely or his memory has deteriorated to the point where he genuinely believes something that never happened, or, Captain Torres interjected, he was exactly what he says he was, a specialist brought in for sensitive operations that by their very nature don't generate paper trails. Convenient, Hastings said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. Your Honor, the prosecution has 3 eyewitnesses who place Colonel Reed at the scene of the alleged war crimes. We have forensic evidence, we have testimony from Iraqi civilians. What we don't need is the confused recollections of an elderly man with no proof he was ever there, spinning tales about classified operations to help his friend. Colonel Reed is not my friend, James said quietly from the witness stand. Hastings turned to face him. Then why are you here, Mr. Crawford? Why come forward now, after all these years, to testify for a man you don't even know? James met his gaze steadily. Because I was there. And I know what happened, and I won't sit by while a good man gets destroyed for something he didn't do. You know what happened, Hastings repeated mockingly. Mr. Crawford, can you tell this court what you had for breakfast this morning? Oatmeal. Black coffee? What about yesterday morning? James paused. I don't recall, Hastings smiled. You don't recall what you ate yesterday, but you expect this court to believe you have clear memories from 50 years ago. I remember things that matter, Major. Do you remember where you left your car keys this morning? Objection, Torres said. Is there a point to this? Your Honor, there is, Hastings said. I'm demonstrating that Mr. Crawford's memory is unreliable. That his testimony should be given no weight. That at best, he's a confused old man, and at worst, he's deliberately lying to this court. The courtroom fell silent. That was a serious accusation. Perjury in military court-martial carried severe penalties. James Crawford looked at the prosecutor for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, son, I've been called a lot of things in my life. But nobody's ever called me a liar twice. Something in his voice, something hard and cold beneath the gentle drawl, made Hastings take an involuntary step back. Judge Brennan banged her gavel once. Major Hastings, do you have any actual evidence that Mr. Crawford is lying, or are we simply going to continue attacking his age? Your Honor, his age is relevant to his credibility. Then present your evidence, for the record, and let me rule on it. But I will not have witnesses badgered in my courtroom simply because they're elderly. Hastings sensed he was losing ground. He needed to land a knockout blow. Your Honor, I request a recess to call a rebuttal witness. Someone who can speak to Mr. Crawford's credibility, a medical expert who can testify to the unreliability of elderly testimony. Torres objected immediately. That's absurd, Your Honor. The prosecution is trying to disqualify an entire demographic from testifying, but Hastings wasn't done. He pulled a document from his file. I also had evidence that Mr. Crawford has been treated for post-traumatic stress disorder. That he has, in his medical records, documented hallucinations and episodes of dissociation. This man's grip on reality is questionable at best. James's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of emotion he'd shown. Judge Brennan looked at the defense table. Captain Torres, were you aware of this? Your Honor, Mr. Crawford's medical history is protected. Not when he's testifying in a court-martial that could result in life imprisonment. Hastings shot back. The prosecution has a right to impeach witnesses. And this man's mental health history directly impacts his credibility. The judge was quiet for a moment, studying the document Hastings had provided. Finally, she said, I'm going to allow the questioning to continue. But Major Hastings, you're on thin ice. Proceed carefully, Hastings. Turned back to James. Mr. Crawford, is it true that you were treated at a VA hospital for PTSD-related hallucinations? I was treated for PTSD, yes. And did those treatments include medications for hallucinations? I had some nightmares, flashbacks, that's common for. Just answer the question, Mr. Crawford. Did you or did you not receive medications for hallucinations? I did. So you admit that you have, in the past, been unable to distinguish between reality and imagination. That's not what PTSD. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. No further questions. Hastings turned to the judge. Your Honor, I rest my case for striking this witness's testimony. He's unreliable, undocumented, and admittedly prone to hallucinations. His testimony is worthless. The word hung in the air like a slap. Worthless. James Crawford sat in the witness box, his weathered face impassive, but something had changed in his eyes. Something cold and distant, like a door closing. Judge Brennan looked at the defense table. Captain Torres, do you have any response? Torres stood, but before she could speak, the courtroom door opened. A tall man in an army dress uniform stepped inside. He wore the insignia of a 3-star general. His chest was covered with ribbons and medals that told the story of a lifetime in combat. His face was weathered, his bearing unmistakably military, and when he walked, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Your Honor, the general said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, I apologize for the interruption. But I couldn't let this continue without speaking. Judge Brennan's eyes widened. General Hawthorne, sir, this is an active court-martial. Unless you're here in an official capacity, I'm here as a witness, Your Honor." The general walked down the center aisle, every eye in the courtroom following him. "I should have been called days ago, but I only just learned that James Crawford was testifying in this case. Hastings found his voice, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. The witness list was submitted weeks ago." "I'm aware, Major," General Hawthorne said. He reached the front of the courtroom and stopped, turning to face James Crawford. Their eyes met. James stood up slowly from the witness box, his movement deliberate and precise. The general came to attention and rendered the sharpest, most perfect salute Hastings had ever seen. "Mr. Crawford," the general said, his voice thick with emotion, "it's been a long time." James returned the salute with equal precision. "General." "Good to see you, Your Honor." Hawthorne turned to the judge. "I need to be sworn in. I have testimony that's directly relevant to Mr. Crawford's credibility." Hastings was scrambling now. "Your Honor, the prosecution objects. This witness hasn't been vetted, hasn't been deposed." "Your Honor," Torres said quickly, "the defense has no objection to General Hawthorne's testimony." Judge Brennan looked between the general, the old man in the witness box, and the increasingly panicked prosecutor. "General Hawthorne, are you prepared to testify under oath?" "I am, Your Honor." Ben approached the bench. 5 minutes later, General Patrick Hawthorne sat in the witness box, his right hand still raised from taking the oath. James Crawford had returned to his seat in the gallery, watching quietly. "General Hawthorne," Judge Brennan began, "please state your current position for the record." "I'm the Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, Your Honor. I've served in the United States Army for 37 years. And how do you know James Crawford?" The general looked across the courtroom at James. "He saved my life in 1971, and then he saved it again in 1989, and again in 2004. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Brennan banged her gavel. "Order." Hastings stood up. "Your Honor, I don't see how this is relevant to—" "Sit down, Major," Brennan said sharply. "General, please continue." Hawthorne took a breath. "Your Honor, I need to explain something about military operations that most people don't understand. There's a level of classified activity that exists so far off the books that it doesn't generate records. No orders, no reports, no paper trail of any kind. The men who operate at that level don't get medals, they don't get recognition. They just do the work and disappear back into the shadows." He paused. "James Crawford has operated at that level for over 50 years. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "In 1971, Hawthorne continued, "I was a lieutenant leading a reconnaissance patrol in Laos. We walked into an ambush. 13 men. We were surrounded, outnumbered, and out of ammunition. We had maybe an hour before they overran our position. That's when James Crawford appeared." Hastings said skeptically. "Yes, Major, appeared, out of the jungle, alone. He killed 7 enemy soldiers, extracted my entire patrol, and disappeared before we even got back to base. I didn't learn his name until 3 years later." Hawthorne looked at James. "In 1989, I was a captain in Honduras. CIA operation. Things went wrong. I was captured by narco-terrorists. They were going to execute me. James Crawford walked into their compound, alone, got me out, and vanished, again. And in 2004, Hawthorne said, his voice hardening, "I was a colonel in Baghdad. My convoy hit an IED. 4 of my men were killed. We were pinned down by insurgents. I was bleeding out. And once again, James Crawford showed up. Except this time, he wasn't alone." The general looked directly at Colonel Reed at the defense table. "Colonel Reed was with him. They saved 17 soldiers that night, including me. I was unconscious for most of it, but I remember enough. And when I woke up in the hospital, James Crawford was sitting next to my bed. He told me exactly what happened, every detail. And I wrote it down in my personal journal." He pulled a worn notebook from his uniform pocket. "I have it right here, Your Honor. Dated November 17, 2004. Every word James Crawford told me." Hastings was pale. "Your Honor, this is ... I need time to verify." "You called him a liar, Major," Hawthorne said, his voice cold. "You called him confused, unreliable, worthless. You want to know why there are no official records of James Crawford being in Iraq? Because men like him don't exist on paper. They exist in the memories of the soldiers they saved. He stood up, his uniform crisp, his bearing commanding. I've commanded Special Operations Forces for 2 decades. I've worked with Delta, SEALs, Rangers, CIA operatives, the best of the best. And I'm telling this court, under oath, that James Crawford is the most capable, most reliable, most honorable man I have ever known. The general's voice dropped to a near whisper. He has no medals because his operations were too classified to acknowledge. He has no records because his missions were too sensitive to document. He has PTSD because he spent 50 years in hell so that soldiers like me could come home. And you dare to call him unreliable? Hawthorne turned to face Hastings directly. Major, I have 16 stars on this uniform for men who owe their lives to James Crawford. I can have them in this courtroom by tonight. Every single one will tell you the same thing. That man is a ghost, a legend. And when he says he was there, you can take it to the bank. The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan looked at Hastings. Major, do you have any questions for General Hawthorne? Hastings opened his mouth, closed it, finally managed. No, Your Honor. Then I'm ruling that James Crawford's testimony stands. Objection overruled. She banged her gavel. We'll take a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, Hastings remained at his table, staring at nothing. He'd just been destroyed, not by evidence, not by procedure, but by truth. Across the room, James Crawford stood slowly and walked toward the exit. As he passed General Hawthorne, the general stood and extended his hand. Thank you, sir, Hawthorne said quietly. James shook his hand. You didn't have to do that, Patrick. Yes, I did. Some debts you never finish paying. James nodded once and continued toward the door. As he walked, other soldiers in the gallery stood up, first one, then another, then all of them. Not at attention, just standing, a silent acknowledgement. Outside the courtroom, James stood in the hallway, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, from something else. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. Captain Torres approached him. Mr. Crawford, thank you for testifying, for coming forward. Is Colonel Reed going to be okay? After what just happened? Yes, I think so, James nodded. Good. He's a good man. Doesn't deserve what they were trying to do to him. Neither do you, sir. James smiled slightly. I'm old. I'm used to not being believed. Doesn't bother me much anymore. It should bother someone, Torres said. What they did to you in there was their job, James finished. The prosecutor was just doing what he thought was right. Can't fault a man for that. He started walking toward the elevator. Torres watched him go, this quiet, humble man who had just been vindicated by a 3-star general, walking away like it was nothing. Because to James Crawford, it was nothing. It was just another day of doing what he'd always done. Showing up, doing the job, and going home. 3 weeks later, Colonel Reed was acquitted. The prosecution's case fell apart completely once James Crawford's testimony was corroborated by General Hawthorne and the 16 other officers who came forward, each with their own story of the man who'd saved their lives and disappeared. Major Hastings requested a transfer. He got it. And James Crawford went back to his small house in rural Virginia, where nobody knew his name. Man, nobody needed to. Because some men don't need recognition. They just need to know they did the right thing. And that's enough. 2 years passed. The leaves turned gold in Virginia, then brown, then green again. James Crawford lived his quiet life: morning coffee, afternoon walks, evening news. He didn't follow the military anymore, didn't read about the wars. He'd given enough years to that world, but the world, it seemed, wasn't quite done with him. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon. James was in his kitchen, washing dishes, when he heard it. 3 sharp raps. He dried his hands and walked to the door, opening it to find General Hawthorne standing on his porch in civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt. Patrick, James said, surprised. Wasn't expecting you. I know, sir. I should have called. Can I come in? James stepped aside. Course, coffee? Please. They sat at James's small kitchen table, 2 men separated by rank and generation, but connected by something deeper. Hawthorne wrapped his hands around the coffee mug and was quiet. For a long moment, "You're retiring," James said. It wasn't a question. Hawthorne smiled slightly. "How do you know? You don't show up at someone's house in the middle of the day, wearing jeans unless you're either retire or about to be. You always were observant." Hawthorne took a sip of coffee. "Yeah. Next month, 38 years. Time to let the young ones take over. Good for you. They're throwing me a ceremony. Fort Bragg, black tie, the whole dog and pony show." Hawthorne looked at James. "I'd like you to be there." James shook his head. "Patrick, you know I don't do." "I know, but I'm not asking as a general. I'm asking as the kid you pulled out of the jungle in 1971. The one who would have died if you hadn't shown up." James was quiet. "There's something else," Hawthorne continued. "JSOC is establishing a new training program, Advanced Reconnaissance and Surveillance. Teaching the next generation how to operate in denied areas. Ghost protocols, the kind of stuff you used to, James emphasized. "I recommended you as a consultant, instructor, whatever you want to call it. Just come talk to them. Tell them what it was really like. Not the Hollywood version, the real version." "Patrick, I'm 81 years old, and you're still the best operator I've ever known." "Age doesn't change that." James looked out the window at his quiet street, at the life he'd built after decades of operating in the shadows. It was peaceful, safe, exactly what he'd wanted. But somewhere, young soldiers were being trained. Being sent into the same kinds of situations that had nearly killed him dozens of times. And maybe, just maybe, he could help them come home. "One session," James said. "I'll come talk to them once. But that's it." Hawthorne smiled. "That's all I'm asking." The retirement ceremony was everything James had feared it would be: crowds, speeches, medals, and attention. He sat in the audience in a simple dark suit, feeling profoundly out of place among the uniforms and dignitaries. When it came time for Hawthorne's speech, the general spoke about his career, his commanders, his soldiers. And then he said something that made James stiffen in his seat. "There's someone here tonight who taught me the most important lesson of my career," Hawthorne said. "He's not in uniform, he's never been on TV. Most of you have never heard his name. But every mission I've ever led, every decision I've ever made, has been influenced by what he showed me. He looked directly at James. He taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the job anyway. That honor isn't about medals or recognition. It's about doing the right thing when no one's watching. And that the most powerful warriors are often the quietest ones." General Hawthorne came to attention and saluted James from across the room. And then, one by one, every officer in attendance stood and did the same. James sat there, surrounded by hundreds of saluting soldiers, and felt something crack open inside him. Not grief, not pride, just release, like a weight he'd been carrying for 50 years had finally been lifted. He stood slowly and returned the salute. A week later, James walked into a nondescript building at Fort Bragg. The sign on the door read "Advanced Training Group, Restricted Access." Inside, 30 young soldiers sat in classroom seats, watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. A lieutenant colonel stood at the front of the room. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. James Crawford. He's going to talk to you about reconnaissance operations. I expect your full attention and respect." The colonel left. James stood at the front of the room, looking at the young faces staring back at him. He could see the questions in their eyes. Who is this old guy? What could he possibly teach us? "I'm not here to teach you tactics," James began, his quiet voice filling the room. "You've got instructors for that. I'm not here to tell you war stories. You'll make your own. I'm here to tell you one thing, and if you remember it, you might just survive." He paused. "Fear is your enemy. Not the people shooting at you, not the darkness, not the cold or the hunger or the pain. Fear. It'll make you hesitate. It'll make you doubt. It'll get you killed." A young soldier in the front row raised his hand. "Sir, how do you deal with fear?" "You don't," James said. "You can't make fear go away, but you can choose what you do with it. You can let it freeze you, or you can use it to keep you sharp." "Sir, they said you operated alone most of the time. How did you handle that?" James smiled slightly. "I didn't handle it, I survived it. There's a difference. Every mission, I was terrified. Every time I went into enemy territory, I thought it might be the last time. But I went anyway, not because I was brave. Because the mission mattered more than my fear." Another hand went up. "Sir, you have PTSD, right?" The question would have been intrusive in any other context, but James had learned that young soldiers needed honesty more than they needed heroes. "Yes." "Does it ever go away?" "No, you learn to live with it. You learn to recognize the triggers, you learn that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival. And you learn that the nightmares don't make you less of a soldier. They make you human." For 2 hours, James talked. Not about tactics or techniques, but about the reality of operating in the shadows, about loneliness, about moral ambiguity, about coming home and realizing that nobody could ever understand what you'd seen. When the session ended, the soldiers stood and applauded. Not because he'd inspired them with tales of glory, but because he'd told them the truth. As James was leaving, the young soldier who'd asked about PTSD approached him. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Do you regret it, all those years in the shadows? All the things you can't talk about?" James thought about it every day, and not at all. "I don't understand, sir. I regret what it cost me. The relationships I couldn't have, the normal life I never got to live. The weight I carry." James paused. "But I don't regret the missions. I don't regret the soldiers I brought home. I don't regret showing up when nobody else could. And I wouldn't change it, even if I could." The young soldier nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." James walked out of the building into the afternoon sun. His old pickup truck was waiting in the parking lot. He climbed in, his joints protesting, and sat there for a moment. He was 81 years old. He'd spent more than half his life in the shadows. He'd seen things that still woke him up at night. He'd done things that would never be acknowledged. But in that courtroom 2 years ago, when Major Hastings had called him unreliable, confused, worthless, and General Hawthorne had stood up and told the truth, something had changed, not in how the world saw him, but in how he saw himself. He wasn't worthless, he wasn't confused. He was exactly what he'd always been, a soldier who did the job when it needed doing. And that, James thought as he started the engine and drove toward home, was enough. It always had been. James Crawford's story reminds us that the most capable warriors are often the quietest. They don't seek medals or recognition. They don't need validation from those who've never walked in their boots. They just show up, do the impossible, and disappear back into the world carrying the weight of what they've done so others don't have to. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to understand that age doesn't diminish valor, it refines it. And that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, one mission, one sacrifice, one quiet act of courage at a time. Subscribe to Human Truth Tales for more stories of the warriors who operate in the shadows and the truths that come to light when someone finally speaks their names. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever been dismissed or underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Have you met someone whose quiet strength changed your life? Share their story. Let's honor them together. To every soldier who's been called unreliable because records don't exist for classified operations. To every warrior dismissed because age makes people forget that legends never fade. We see you, we honor you, and we will never stop telling your stories.